Today is an exciting day for Rugby League, an historic day for Rugby League. Early this morning, the Commission approved the expansion to 17 teams in the NRL Telstra Premiership and the addition of the Dolphins as the 17th club in the NRL franchises. This is extremely exciting for us because coming out of the last 2 years, we always said at the start, and when I started as CEO, and Peter has echoed this many times as our chairman, this was about stabilising, renovating and then growing. And we're very pleased that now we can look to the future. We're in a great position to think about growth, not only of the NRL competition with the addition of the 17th franchise, but also think about the growth of the NRLW competition and, importantly, participation and pathways. Those are critical to the long-term success of Rugby League. But today is exciting because it's not just about adding a 17th team. This is also about a strategy specifically for Queensland. So working with the QRL, working with the Broncos, the Titans, the Cowboys, and now, of course, the Dolphins, the NRL can get in and behind a strategy that's holistic, that covers all corners of the state, that thinks about the growth of the game from the bottom all the way up to the top. That's incredibly exciting for us. This was a strategic consideration. It's been thought about over a number of years. It's been a very thorough and rigorous process. This process considered not just what was important in the short term, but also what would be important for the game in the long term. It has been very carefully researched. It has been data-driven, and that's why it's taken as long as it has taken for the Commission to get to this point. It was important for us to engage with our existing members, which we did last week and throughout the process. It was important that we looked at the bids, not just in terms of what was submitted, but also making sure that all the facts and the data supported that very carefully. We looked at 5 key criteria when determining which bid would be successful: the governance and risk, the approach to financial strength, the commercial strategy of the organisation, football competitiveness, and then very importantly, growth of the game, participation and pathways. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the 2 bidders that were not successful on this particular occasion, the Firehawks and the Jets. A credit to their organisation, a credit to their leaders, Steve Johnson and Nick Livermore, the joint CEOs of the Jets bid, and Brian Torpey, the CEO of the Firehawks. It was incredibly compelling. We were very fortunate and had the difficult choice to make, having 3 outstanding bids to consider. I want to acknowledge the Dolphins, from their chairman, Bob Jones, the CEO, Tony Murphy, the bid director, Terry Reeder. They've been outstanding to deal with. They provided the best overall submission to the bid assessment committee and ultimately to the Commission. And they have shown a real appetite to invest in the growth of the game. And part of the conditions of awarding the license to the Dolphins includes them spending and investing $2 million a year into participation and pathways, both in terms of the men's and the women's game, Indigenous pathways, and making sure that we continue to grow the game in the important Northern Corridor. The population in the Northern Corridor, which includes Moreton Bay, Sunshine Coast and beyond, is over 800,000 people. That's almost as big as Brisbane City. It's forecast to grow to 1.1 million people by 2031. Importantly for us, our research tells us that we have a number of fans in this area and in Queensland that don't currently support an NRL franchise. We're a game of tribes. We live and breathe by the strength of our clubs and that sense of tribalism. So adding a 17th tribe or team to our competition is a huge opportunity for us to acquire new fans, develop new talent, and again, foster the game in a really important market for us. Again, I just want to reiterate the importance of this being an overall strategy for the growth of the game, and again, commit the Commission's support to the QRL, the Broncos, Titans, the Cowboys, and now the Dolphins for how we go about making sure that we grow together in a coordinated fashion. Finally, I want to also acknowledge our partners. The feasibility of growing from 16 teams to 17 teams could only be possible if the economics stacked up. The Commission said from day one, this needs to be value accretive. This needs to add value for all, including the existing members. And we're very fortunate that we've had partners that have stepped up and see the growth that we do and have invested accordingly. So thank you to our broadcast partners, Channel 9 and Fox Sports here, of course Sky in New Zealand, and of course Telstra, our naming rights partner of both the NRL and NRLW. They've been terrific throughout this process and obviously pledged their investment to help us with this growth. Finally, I just want to acknowledge our fans. This is an exciting time for us. We're coming out of a pandemic. We finished the 2020 season. We finished the 2021 season. We did that with tremendous amount of teamwork by all the stakeholders, but our fans have stuck by us. And ultimately, this is a decision that is going to help grow the excitement around the game as we head into 2023, and also create new opportunities for new fans to be brought into the game. We pride ourselves on being an inclusive game, and this is just another step. So stabilise, renovate and grow. This is an exciting day for us because it is part of the growth phase. I'll take any questions.
And you can dig a bit deeper into why Redcliffe?
Yeah, sure. As I said earlier, Brent, 3 very compelling bids. Redcliffe is no longer the name. The name is the Dolphins. I mean, they are quite deliberately calling themselves the Dolphins. This is about owning not just Brisbane and having a second Brisbane team, but owning the North as well. So there were a number of elements here. First of all, and I'll go back to the criteria because that's essentially how this was adjudicated. From a governance and a risk perspective, from a stability and a financial diversification of revenues, this is not something that the Commission and NRL want to invest tens of millions of dollars into. We need a club that can stand on their own 2 feet, have diversified revenue streams and have a plan, a very strong commercial plan. It was important for any club to bring new sponsors into the game, not cannibalise existing sponsors. And with the Dolphins, we've seen the ability of a club to bring in and already have contracted a naming rights partner and several significant sponsors that aren't currently invested in the game. And then, very importantly, we want a team that can be successful on the field very quickly. And what we saw in the proposal were personnel and structures around a team that we believe can perform very quickly at the highest level. And then finally, participation and pathways. Importantly, what we've seen from the Dolphins is a plan to grow the men's competition, the women's competition, to connect and have affiliations throughout Queensland, and to create opportunities for us to bring new participants into the game. So it was quite a holistic approach to this, and they were the best. Certainly, the bid assessment committee were unanimous in declaring them the overall winner against a number of criteria.
Have they assured you one will be their coach?
Excuse me?
Have they assured you one will be their coach?
I mean, part of all the team submissions were putting forward what their plans would be to compete. So that would include a general manager of football, a head coach, and how they would go about their recruitment and where their players would come from an own development perspective as well. So there are a number of factors there. I'll let the Dolphins talk about what their plans are for their personnel, but it was very important for us and for the Commission to see that there was a clear plan for this team to be successful straight away, on the field and off the field.
Andrew, how much of a factor was what the AFL's doing in that region and securing that as Rugby League heartland?
I mean, rightly or wrongly, I don't concern myself too much with other sports. I'm really consumed with rugby league, and it takes 25 of the 24 hours that I have available in my time. And I say that not from a point of view of arrogance at all. I say that from the point of view of a razor focus on what's right for us. Our game is different to other games in Australia in a good way. And we have to think about what's right for us. What I will say, though, is when you look at Brisbane as a market compared to Sydney and Melbourne as the other big capital cities where we play, we have 17 professional teams in Sydney, 17 professional teams in Melbourne, and we have 6 professional teams in Brisbane. And when you look at it from a GDP perspective, if you take the total GDP or the population of those different cities divided by the number of teams, we see that Brisbane is a key market for us to take advantage of in terms of growth. Then you marry that up against the fact that our own research tells us we've got a number of fans in Queensland that don't support an NRL team but are interested or casual fans of the game. This is a great opportunity for us to take advantage of that. So from that perspective, we're very excited about what a 17th team in Brisbane, the greater Brisbane area, and of course Queensland can bring for us growth-wise.
So they've made it quite clear they're not Redcliffe. Do we know what they're actually going to be?
They will be the Dolphins.
Just the Dolphins?
Yeah.
Andrew, how close was it? Was this an obvious choice or
No.
a tough decision?
No, it's a good question. This is a very tough decision. Part of the reason, I mean, this has been a number of years, this process in the making, a lot of research into the financial feasibility of expansion. We didn't want to rush it. We wanted to make sure this was going to add value, especially to the existing clubs and the existing members in the game. So that has been a very thorough process, a lot of engagement, as I referred to earlier, with our partners, broadcast partners and sponsors to make sure that everyone was on board and that this was feasible. But in terms of the quality of the bids, they were outstanding. We had 3 outstanding bids in front of us, and that is part of the reason why this process has taken as long as it has taken, and it iterated a few times. We went back and forth and required some additional information. We had 5 criteria. There were strengths and areas for development in each of those 3 bids. In the end, though, it was unanimous. The recommendation was unanimous from the bid assessment committee, but it was extremely close.
And do you compare the way when the AFL brought in their last 2 teams, they had draft concessions, all kinds of different things to make sure they'll be up to speed quick? Now you can't name names and who they're going to hire, but what was it about Redcliffe's structures that you speak about that gives you confidence that's not required and they actually can find success immediately?
Yeah, it's a big question. There's a few layers to that question. I mean, as I referred to earlier, for us, very different to other sports, expansion was, we think about expansion differently. So this is not an exercise in us providing significant assistance from the centre, financial or through concessions or otherwise. Expansion needed to happen when we believe we can have a team that can compete from day 1 or from year 1, from 2023. So we needed to make sure that the coaching staff, the football structures, the recruitment strategy, the depth of players and the depth of professional staff, both on and off the field, were sufficient for us to pull this off, and to pull this off from 2023, hit the ground running. So this is a decision that's been made without significant additional financial assistance being required for that franchise, or the consideration of salary cap relief or any of those other matters, which is different to other sports. But we believe we're in a situation, we're very fortunate to be in a situation where we don't need to do that, because we believe this franchise is going to be successful very early.
So when can they start signing players straight away?
The official window for that is November 1 for all clubs, so that will kick in a number of weeks.
And to clarify the name, you said that they will be the Dolphins, but they said they're going to go to market and poll people or the supporters about what the name should be. But are you saying they're giving you assurances it'll just be the Dolphins? Right?
Yeah. And that's part of the discussions that we've had with them fairly recently. I mean, it's important for us that we have a say in this, because this is about the growth of the game, and so we want to have a overall strategic lens to this. And it's been a conversation that we've had with them very recently, and they'll
talk you on Brisbane or Brisbane in the name. Is that incorrect? Is it?
Yeah, it's the Dolphins. Yeah, and I'm sure they'll be able to provide a bit more detail on their thinking and their strategy, but that's what we've decided together.
If that's what you've agreed on, why don't you want a location name? Because obviously of the 16 current clubs, I think 15 do. The Warriors are the only exception to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, historically, that's been a decision made by individual clubs. But for us, it made sense for this to be the Dolphins, because they are. We're talking here about not just the greater Brisbane area, but we are talking about north of Brisbane. We're talking about Moreton Bay. We're talking about the Sunshine Coast. They have an affiliation. They have obviously a current affiliation with 2 clubs, but they're also talking about Central Queensland Capras. They're thinking about other broader affiliations, and there's also plans in the works to discuss what the female elite pathway looks like in that region. So there's a broad number of considerations here.
So not even in the future they won't even have sort of like that named identity of like Moreton Bay or anything like that?
No, just the Dolphins. And they'll play, they'll play games at Suncorp Stadium. They'll play regional games. They'll play potentially games potentially on the Sunshine Coast and potentially at Redcliffe as well. But most of their games will be based out of Suncorp Stadium.
Do you worry that that sort of gives them an full identity though?
Not at all. Yeah, I mean, again, I'll go back to the research. And what we've seen in the research is that, people are incredibly receptive to a city rivalry. Here we've got the best of both worlds, because we're going to have a very important rivalry here with the Broncos in terms of an inner city rivalry. And we've seen from other sports just how powerful it is when you have 2 teams in a very small market. We see that ourselves in Sydney as well with Rugby League. But then more importantly, we now have genuinely 4 Queensland teams. That opens up 12 rivalry matches for us. That opens up an opportunity for rivalry with the Titans, with the Cowboys, not just the Broncos. So I think being able to capture that inner city rivalry, but also appealing to a much broader base, is the best of both worlds. And that's why the Dolphins as a name, I think, is more appropriate.
And there's been an advantage with the clubs over funding. Have you given them assurances that they will improve out of this, funding-wise?
Yeah.
They're smiling.
Yeah, well,
We knew that question was coming, right?
well, no, just because I mean this is rugby league, and I guess there is argy-bargy on and off the field, and that's you expect that, and you respect that as well. We've done a terrific job in the last 2 years in rebuilding the game. We're in a fortunate position where we have a great relationship with all of the members. We've come through this together. We've completed 2 seasons under extraordinarily challenging circumstances, and the game has made some tough calls at head office to get us in shape, to renovate and to grow. So clearly, we don't want to take a step backwards when it comes to funding our clubs. They are the engine room of the growth of the game. We don't want to take a step backwards when it comes to funding participation and pathways in the States either. So what we're reorganising to do is reorganising to increase investment. Now, exactly what that looks like and to what quantum, that work needs to unfold. We need to have all the pieces in place in terms of our broader contracts on revenue before we know exactly what the pot looks like. But the Commission has made it clear, as we've done in the last 2 years, we stick by our members and we've supported the clubs through this. We've increased our funding to them through this process. And wherever possible, we'll look to increase our funding, provided that it's aligned to the growth of the game and the best interests of the game. And we want to support clubs with their own mission to win fans, create new opportunities for female pathways, Indigenous pathways, and also open up, touch, tag, all formats of the game and make sure that we become the largest, most connected sports community in Australia.
So when do you reckon you'll be in position to tell them what they're going to get? You've got to get the free-to-air deal, right?
I don't know the answer to that. We've got to land a few pieces. There's free-to-air, there's our naming rights partnership. There are a few issues there are a few contracts that we would need some certainty on. And then clearly we're going to turn our attention to forecasting what the next 5 years looks like from a revenue perspective, and then a conversation around funding, not just for the clubs. The Commission needs to make a call overall, and that's why you have the value of an independent commission. How do we allocate our resources to get the balance right between the short term and the long term, to get the balance right between the elite and grassroots? So it's a very careful consideration of how you allocate resources. Also, you want to fund to grow. So you want to make sure that if we are going to increase funding to any entity or to clubs, that investment is going into the right areas. We're not duplicating, and that those areas are going to enable growth and the commercial stability and financial stability of that individual club and the game as well.
And just in terms, you said the clubs are providing you with some sort of evidence as to what sort of team they can put together to be competitive. Did they actually put a listed team in front of you as part of their bid?
No, they haven't put a team in front of us. I mean, they can't do that because they're obviously not able to contract players. No, what they've done is demonstrate to us how they would go about building a team, who they would contract first up from a non-playing perspective to help them then go about contracting. So it's not been about seeing actual players or seeing any draft teams. That's not the case at all. But a very detailed plan on how that will get built and what parameters that will operate in. But of course, we've also looked at the depth of players. We've looked at the State Cup, particularly the Intrust State Cup in Queensland, looked at the depth of players and the mix of, over time, a team developing their own talent and then the natural marketplace movement that occurs as it does at the moment.
Andrew, the natural question of this is how long do you hold for 18 teams? Like Blythe is pretty strong on the weekend.
Yeah, and so I'll go back to what I said right at the start. So stabilise, renovate and grow. Grow is multiple facets. We are very serious about growing our female game. Next year is a huge year for us. 2 NRLWs. We're expanding to 6 teams, potentially again. And that's our real focus in the short term. Next year is all about making sure that we put the foundations in place to really accelerate the growth of the women's game over the next couple of years. Obviously, getting the roadmap ready for the 17th team coming in 23 is also going to be a real focus for us. But 17 is a natural stepping stone to 18. And at 18, we have another fixture. And that provides a whole nother opportunity for our fans, another 80 minutes of footy, another round, another match in the round, another opportunity for us to grow fans in potentially another market. I'll go back to the quality of these 3 bids. Each of them could have justifiably probably qualified and been able to run a successful NRL team. So we are spoiled for choice, but clearly we are not going to take our eye off the ball, and we're going to keep looking at ways in which we can continue to grow. It'll always have to stack up. First things first, We want to focus on the women's game. We want to focus on a successful 17th team inclusion in 23. And obviously in the background, we'll be thinking about growth.
Do you have an ideal duration on how long 17 teams last before you go to 18?
No.
And you mentioned the other bid stacking up. Does that indicate would you like to go again to Brisbane or Queensland for that 18th team?
I haven't, I'll be honest, this was all finalised this morning. So those considerations we will look at, but we have an open mind, and I think the Commission has an open mind. We do what's right for the game and what's right for the growth of the game overall. We're just fortunate that we have a number of teams that could meet that criteria in Queensland, but we need to consider all parts of Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific in thinking about expansion. So that'll all follow in due course. And again, it'll be data driven, it'll be rigorous, there'll be lots of consultation, and it'll be for the right reasons.
Could that be, could that be sooner rather than later, like within the next 5 years, or are you thinking, 10 years down?
I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. There are a few things we need to get right first, but it'll be when we're ready, and that could be that it happens in the next cycle, but there's no predetermined view on that yet.
And do you have an idea on, you keep mentioning women, is there an idea on when Redcliffe will have, the Dolphins will have an NRL team? I mean, obviously the next round of expansion there is in late 2022, that's before.
Yeah, more important for us was the blueprint and the investment in female pathways from the bottom up. So what we wanted to see, and what we want to see from all our clubs really, is an opportunity to see the investment from the grassroots up to make sure that we are developing and opening up pathways for talent to be developed in the long term. So it's less about having an NRL team coming out of the Dolphins or any new franchise, more about their commitment to grow a sustainable pathway for women to ultimately play in the NRL. And that might be in that franchise in the short term, might not be, but it was more about grassroots development.
Can you talk us through what the 2023 season will look like in terms of 26 rounds, couple more buys? And what was the reason behind it?
Yes, you've covered the gist of it. So we have 12 additional matches. So we go from 192 regular season matches to 204 matches. With those 12 matches, we still maintain 8 games around. It'll be a 26 round competition. Each club will play 12 home and away games. And through a 26 round competition, each team will get 2 buys. Those buys will be split. Some teams will get theirs at the first part of the season and through the origin period, some in the latter part of the season and through the origin period. And that's about it. The competition actually stays within the same window. So it still gets completed over a very similar period to how we have it at the moment. We just get more buys through. And also, this gives us more options to reduce 5-day turnarounds, to improve player welfare, and also to get a bit more balance in the draw, because it does free up some constraints. It's still a very complex exercise, but gives us a little bit more flexibility.